Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Uncorked with Funny Wine Girl. This is Funny Wine Girl, aka Janine Luby. So this week we are going to be talking plants, and I do not really have a green thumb, although I think it's getting slightly more in that shade. It's funny. People used to say, "Oh, you can't kill succulents," but I can tell you, you can. I've killed succulents, but truthfully, that's kind of a misnomer because you can overwater them, which I have done. And I was never interested in gardens probably until about 4 or 5 years ago. And now I have to say, I'm really enjoying what I am doing. And I have to also say, my hat is off to people who do it because it is hard work, weeding and everything. And that stuff takes time. It's hard work. And here we are, we're approaching July, and a lot of people take great pride in their garden. So I wanted to talk about that, talk about things like pollinator plants, native plants, why that's important, what they actually are, and why you might want to add some to your garden and keep that in mind even for next year. So we have someone with us this week. I keep saying we, like I have like a mouse in my pocket helping me record, but I have a guest joining me this week who knows her way around plants very well. I always like to say how I meet people because I think it's important that you meet someone somewhere and you don't know where you're going to see them again, how you might be able to help one another out at some point. So I met Shelly Neifert is my guest this week. And I met Shelly a couple of years ago when I was doing some social media work and marketing at Edwards Garden Center in 44. And I have to say, she always had great reviews from the customers. She always knew what she was talking about. And she got me actually interested in wanting to know more about plants. So I'm really excited to have her on so that you guys can learn a little bit more and get inspired, hopefully. So welcome, Shelly.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here today, and I'm glad to hear there's more interest in gardening now.
Yeah. I will tell you, I will tell you, until I did some gardening a couple of years ago, I had no, I won't say I had disrespect, but I did not have the level of respect that I now do for people. That's hard work. Like just weeding alone, and like to lay down like that black cloth, the material, and then put my stones down. I'm like, that takes hours. So my hat is completely off to people who do gardening of all kinds, because I think it's hard work, really.
It is. I can spend on average 3 to 4 hours every day just in my own gardens working for fun. I do that on the side. So it definitely can take a lot of work. And even when I'm doing it, I underestimate it. After doing it professionally 16 years, I still look at a project and I'm like, oh, this isn't bad. And then I'm in the middle of doing it. And I'm like, why did I decide to do this? But I love it by the end again.
Now, just before we get into some of the other topics, what's your garden like? So what do you like to do for in your home?
So I love English cottage gardening specifically. So most of our gardening should be more that style. It's very full. I actually don't like to use fabric in my garden at all because I want plants to fill in and multiply. So my gardens aren't spaced out and uniform in any manner. They're very wild looking. Now they're still contained and they have an arrangement style to them. So it looks appropriate, but it is going to be full of every vibrant color across the rainbow, and there's going to be different heights and textures. And I want it where people walk through and I feel like they're in a secret garden movie, like this beautiful, private, magical garden.
That actually sounds beautiful. I would, that sounds beautiful. So let me ask you on that note. Like I said, I was not a gardener before. So when I did want to, I had ferns, I guess it was like this one section that were all ferns forever. Nobody did anything with it, and which was fine. And I decided I want to get them out of there and I want to create like a little garden. So of course, people I knew said, oh, you have to put down that black cloth so that the weeds don't pop up. So I did that. And I put, now I have some lovely perennials. I have the bleeding heart. I have is it a stibula or a stibia? It's a
Still be.
beautiful, what is it?
A still be.
A still be beautiful, like deep pink that's been coming up. And I'm loving my coral bells because that is growing beautifully in the shade there. But do we not need that black cloth? Because I mean, hey, that's more work. So if we can do that away with it, I'd be happy with that.
So it all depends. If you want to immediately start filling in your garden, don't even bother putting it down. It's actually more work when you have to slice through the fabric each time to dig a new hole to put another plant in. Now, if you wanted to slowly fill in, and especially for a beginner gardener, I'd say go with like the lower end cheap fabric that will deteriorate on its own. So, and that will last like 2 to 3 years maybe. And that's a good way to start. So you're not overwhelmed with the weeds, gives the plants an opportunity to grow before weeds take over all the nutrients in the soil. So if anything, use the cheap fabric. That way it will disintegrate on its own in the moisture underneath mulch. Um, Stone also works. I actually like to incorporate stone mixed in with mulch, which is a great thing I'd like to talk about more later.
Okay.
But definitely do it that way if you don't want to have to worry about a lot of work to start off. And then with time, as it disintegrates, you can, at that point, your garden should be filling in more. A lot of your perennials by year 3 really start to hit their full maturity and start to spread.
Yeah, I've noticed. I don't know if this is year 3 or 4. I feel like it might be 3. The coral bell is huge right now. Like it really grew, and even the bleeding heart is pretty large. And I have a really nice oh gosh, silver fern maybe it is. And I want to say that these all came from a friend who I didn't even know you could do this. I guess her garden was getting too big, and she wanted to get rid of some plants. So these were all donated. She brought them to my house, and we planted them. And I'm like, wow, I didn't even know that you could do that, which is great. I mean, it was wonderful that she gave me these, and they all work very nicely in the shaded area that I have there, which was really important too. Let me ask you about the weeds though, for before we move on, just because I see it's funny. I read different things, and you see inspirational quotes about weeds, and I know they do serve in many ways. I guess they can serve a purpose, right? And also a lot of weeds tend to have some flowers that sprout up, because I've noticed things that come up, and I'm like, gee, I didn't plant that. What is it? But it'll have a flower on it, and I'm like, well, that's nice. Can we I guess they're harmful occasionally. I guess they'd be harmful to other plants, but they can actually be left alone sometimes too, right?
Absolutely. So what we consider weeds nowadays, I actually don't believe in the word weeds to a certain extent. So I use it for a public acknowledgement, but in general, weeds are just plants that people don't like to approve of, or we've been taught the last several decades, especially since the 50s, to not like. So some of my favorite plants are considered weeds. The most major one a lot of people actually are finding they really do love are dandelions. They are good. They should be in your landscape. It's actually the first pollinating flower to bloom in the springtime that bees need for a source in the beginning of the year. So I purposely keep dandelions in my garden because bees are waking up, they're starting to hatch. They need an immediate source. Those dandelions are one of their only sources. And if we take that away, they get a really weak start to the season. Another one that's an absolute favorite is your wild violets. You'll see lots of those everywhere in people's yards. And you see people like digging them out, but they're gorgeous. They have a nice broad leaf, shiny leaf, gorgeous purple flowers on them. Those should be in your landscape. Leave those. There are a couple that get out of control, but I like to keep the wild chives. They get gorgeous flowers on them as well. And there are these little, I call them like these blue prairie flowers that people get as well. It looks like a grass. Leave those too. They won't do any harm. They grow in clusters. If you even don't like where it's at, you can dig it up and move it and it will reestablish elsewhere.
It's funny you said that, because I don't know if it was from our time working together and you telling me, or I read about the dandelions. Because my dad, I live right next door to my parents, and my dad was like, "Oh, we got to get rid of those." And I'm like, "Dad, I believe I heard that they're actually needed, because I thought they were pollinators." And I'm like, "Why do you want them gone? Because you just don't like the looks of them, or have you because you've been taught that they have to go?" I'm like, "If they're helping the environment, let's keep them there." And I think on that note, if we can talk a little bit about, I'd like to talk more about pollinators and the importance of it. So that's one thing. They pop up, dandelions, and they're an important pollinator. So we should kind of just let those be. Haha. What else can you tell us about pollinators, the importance of them? Because I had not a clue until I learned from you that they really are important to the environment.
They are. And this actually goes hand in hand with us talking about native plants. Um, your best bet for pollinators are to use native plants for it. And it comes down to not only is it a source of pollination, it also needs to be a host plant. And a host plant is where they feel safe to hatch their eggs on and live off of it as well, which is huge. That is literally their home. So we need to make sure we're planting specific varieties that are meant for our ecosystem. Pollinators, everyone thinks like maybe just bees and butterflies, but it goes beyond that. We need to have a host section for all different types of insects. A lot of people don't want bugs in their garden. The healthy garden will have bugs, and that's just part of it. Now, the best part, especially when it comes to native bug species, they actually really love only certain plants. So they're only going to stay on those plants. If they eat some of the leaves, that's okay. That's what they're there for. That's the point of having plants. Now, a lot of people think bugs are terrible because they think of such invasive species like the Japanese beetle that will ravage an entire garden. That's because that is an invasive species that was introduced to us through the introduction of non-native plants from Asia. So everyone when they think of bugs in their garden, they immediately panic and think of something like that. That's not a native bug to have. We want good bugs because that is the foundation for the rest of our ecosystem. Our birds, our other animals eat those. So if we don't have a section for pollinators, for bees, butterflies, and our insects, we won't have an ecosystem around it. It will be a sterile environment. So plants like coneflowers, they're not specifically native to Pennsylvania, as we're finding out in recent studies, but they are very native to surrounding areas. So I still plant those. Also, black-eyed Susans, also known as Rudbeckia, those are an absolutely amazing native pollinator to have, especially because they serve two purposes. So they're not just good for when they are in bloom, they're good for when they're done blooming to leave the seed heads, the flower heads on for winter, because that is one of the main food sources for finches during winter. When those dry and open up, they can eat all the seeds. So a lot of people don't realize that and cut them down in the fall, but they have a whole nother purpose yet for our local ecosystem. So having all these plants, it's a good way to help support your local flora and fauna because it makes a huge, huge difference.
Kind of like that thing we've heard so many times, the butterfly effect, right? Like everything kind of affects something else. And we don't realize sometimes when we're damaging or things that we can do to help. So if someone wanted to learn more about that, you mentioned the coneflowers, you mentioned the black-eyed Susan. Is there what's a trusted website? I know Penn State is often a good one. What's a good website they can go on if they're just like, okay, I want to learn more about native plants?
Penn State is one of the best ones. I actually really also love Monrovia. They are also a sales site, but they really do well in listing all the details about plants. It's very accurate. I trust that site compared to if you just Google a plant and someone shows you this crazy photo of it and it grows to this size. A lot of times those aren't accurate. Monrovia is definitely a very accurate site to have along with Penn State. And there are local garden centers to go to. There's one in, I want to say it's southeastern Pennsylvania called Edge of the Woods. It is only a native plant nursery. So you do have places like that you can go to. I also like to use another source. A lot of my recent research I've been doing has been from a specific book, Bringing Nature Home by Doug Tallamy. He's spoken actually at a local university a couple of months ago, and we use a lot of his sources with Penn State Master Gardener Extension. And his book in general, he lists a lot of the natives to plant and he explains why, and he goes over what bugs it will bring in and other animals because he's actually an entomologist. So I definitely recommend his book to anyone because he goes over details in the book. And at the end, he'll have, based on region by state, what are native trees, shrubs, woody perennials, regular perennials, and ground covers for your region. So it's a great, great source to have if you want one specific spot to look. And if some people might be like me, I don't like to always use online sources. I like a book in front of me I can keep on the shelf to reference to.
That's a great point. And I'll put that information into the show notes so that people you can links and the name of that book so you can check that out. Let me ask you about, so the native plants, is it best to keep them all and the pollinators, keep them all together? I mean, obviously it would be great to maybe just have a garden that's just them. But if people do have a mix, should they keep all the native plants together and the pollinators together, or is it okay to intermix them with other plants?
I definitely say mix them in is the best way, because those other plants that are non-native are just a sterile environment. So to keep it all functioning and efficient everywhere, it's best to mix your natives in with your non-natives. I am just as guilty of having some non-natives. I originally started in the industry not even focused on the educational part of it. I was pure landscaper 16 years ago. And the person I worked for actually specialized in more of a Japanese garden style. So I worked with mostly non-natives at one point in my life. Once I started learning the importance of natives, I started to veer away, but I still have a love of using non-native plants. And as a landscaper and landscape designer, I still use them greatly, but it's now learning how to incorporate them into your landscape while also still keeping that healthy environment. So I always recommend mixing natives in with your non-natives just to keep a healthy environment.
Okay, that's great advice. Um, you mentioned before, and is there anything else you wanted to say about pollinators and native plants before I move on? I wanted to get back to what you talked about before with the mixing of the mulch and the stones, but I want to give you an opportunity. Is there anything else that you'd want to share about native plants and pollinators?
Yes, they are what we will call revolutionary gardening that's taking over. A lot of social media platforms are showing everyone getting back into gardening, growing their own, to just having it's kind of the trend right now, but it's also people realizing gardening is so important to have and it's life sustaining means to learn. And so part of the revolutionary movement that I'm so happy is starting to take off and I want to see more of it and encourage are those native plants. We can't grow our own food if we don't have native pollinators. Like it will not be an option. If our environment's too sterile, it won't happen. And I'm loving to see this movement, and I hope it encourages more to get rid of lawns or shrink your lawns and putting in gardens instead. And it may seem like a lot of work at times, but depending upon the style you do, it might not be a lot of maintenance. Now, I said I'm in my garden a lot. That's because I'm always adding a new garden. My current garden that I have very full, I barely look at it. I do quite a bit of maintenance in spring to get it going, and that is it. I barely look at my garden the rest of the year unless I need to take off a dead head, a clipping of a plant. That's it. It takes no other maintenance once you have a certain style garden set up, which mine is mostly full of natives. I don't even have to really touch it anymore. So the issue, the using non-natives, it's ruining our environment. And it's taking away our bug and animal population really drastically. So that's why we really do need to get back to native plants. 32 to 40 million acres in the United States has been changed into lawn. We have sterilized almost half our nation.
Wow.
So, and the way to look at it, the math of it is every acre you take away is every so many creatures we're making go extinct. We're looking by the end of our current lifetime, 95% of our flora and fauna to be extinct because of the rate we're going in industrialization, suburban movements, clearing out properties. Only 1/20th of the United States is considered undisturbed at this point. Like we've already annihilated most of the United States. So the point of natives is to bring it back. It's not going to be the same landscape, it's still disturbed, but now we can start creating a healthy environment to bring insects back because they're so low, the numbers on certain species already. If we get those gardens put in, let's say even 5 people in each neighborhood do it, we can bring back by the thousands, millions of each insect, which is drastically needed. We'll see lightning bugs again. We definitely need to see more of those. We need to see just a bunch of different critters come back. So that would be a really good thing to see, and actually helps even businesses. So part of the issue of using non-natives, it brings pests and disease. One of them being the local Christmas tree industry really got hit in the last 20 years because of woolly adelgids hitting their lots and things like that. So we also have to think about how our local businesses survive on it. Local farmers won't have crops, local growers of anything. And it will cause a huge issue for our economy as well, which is a big, big deal. So something to keep in mind, the importance of natives. We need native plants for pretty much any creature to live. If we fully get rid of that, we are going to have stagnant, sterile zones.
Wow. Well, that's more important than I'm sure many of us even realize. And then one last thought on that. To me, I'm getting, as I'm getting older, I'm almost 52, I'm becoming more cynical, and I see that the bottom line is really usually about money in most cases. But why have we gotten rid of, like, I understand with the developments, they keep putting up housing developments and all these different things. But for me, I would think, hey, a lawn you have to cut with flowers. Yeah, you have to care for them, but that would be more beautiful. Why are we not more aware? Is it just is it ignorance, maybe a lack of education about this, what's actually happening and the importance of the native plants?
I think so. I think there's no education in it. I learned nothing in school. My entire background until I took my training with Master Gardener, which a lot of that I already knew, was all from experience. This isn't taught in a lot of schools. These aren't in textbooks of anything to learn about. There is no curriculum that I'm aware of in grade school about this. So the only way I learned anything about it was going to youth field days, going to other events that my father wanted encouraged, or actually being a hunter, learning what type of environment you need to have for the local deer populations as well. And it's not even about killing deer, it's about actually creating healthy population sizes. So I got into it in my own time as a hobby. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't have that. They don't spend a lot of time outdoors. And we created such an image of having this 1950s Americana green lawn with the perfect laying of sod and these gorgeous strips in your lawn. And it's just, I think, a cultural thing a little bit. And once we got out of survival mode post World War II, I think a lot of people just didn't care about gardening anymore. They love the being able to just go to the grocery store to buy whatever they need. And I think that was a huge part of it. Our grandparents spent all their time working in gardens. Even I did. I actually grew up, we grew a lot of our own food. So that's where I gained a respect for it. As much as I actually hated gardening as a kid, I now understand the importance of it. And I think post World War II, after we were done with victory gardens, it kind of just trailed off. Like no one wanted to do that work anymore. They loved being able to go to the grocery store, have their little American homes with grass lawns, maybe a couple roses, and that's it. And a lot of it really got transformed and even more sterile in the 1980s with the real suburban boom. And we saw all the bi-level homes being built. And every single one had the same landscaping. It had Japanese yew bushes that followed up the hillside to the front door. And it usually had the gumdrop in the middle, the pyramidal on the ends. And if you see a lot of homes that didn't update their landscape, they all still have that same landscape. It's just what was put in, because they grow in nice and big and full quickly for easy sale in the market.
It seems like, well, there's so many things that I didn't learn in school that would have been helpful, to be honest. I mean, jeepers, I'm really not good with money. Money would be something, financial stuff is important to learn. But this is like, honestly, I'm so glad we're having this conversation. I hope people do listen and take something from it, because you really just think, what's gardening? But when you look at it, you really listen to what you're saying, it is so important. It impacts so much. It seems like it should be something that's involved, like city planning, architects, get everybody on board so they understand when you are building these homes. Let's put in, more gardens and, pollinators and things like that, so that we can all work together to solve this problem.
And like you said, it's actually less work in the end, like you said about maintaining a lawn. I never understood putting in a non-native species that you then have to use chemicals to maintain. That makes no sense to me. So a lot of people are like, oh, it's expensive installing a garden. Doesn't have to be. Half my garden is also donations. The best healthy native gardens, where do you get your native plants? From another gardener with native plants. They're actually stronger. It's like heirloom gardening. You're taking from an original plant. Some of the daylilies, some of the cone flowers, they're 50 plus years old from the original host plant. They're going to be stronger than what you even get at a nursery. So I always recommend actually taking divisions from other friends. Make sure the plants are healthy. That's the one thing people definitely need to learn before they do transplants. But that is the best way to garden. I barely have spent money on my big full gardens because a lot of it was transplants. So that's what it really came down to. And once you have that established, like I said, I barely look at my garden. It's filling in on its own. And if it gets too full with perennials, the best part, you just go in with a shovel and you dig out a chunk of it. You won't even harm it. And you can just give that to a friend or plant it elsewhere. So you can actually divide and spread your garden to other friends to across your property for little to no cost. With the yards, you have to buy fuel or charge batteries to mow your lawn, or hire someone to come out weekly. And that's about $30 a grass cut, at least in our area. So that all adds up. Maybe you have to remulch here and there. Okay, like mulches can be anywhere from $25 to $45 a yard of mulch, depending upon where you go. And a lot of places, boroughs have it free to use like a shredded compost, which I like to use, which is almost a mulch itself. So you could get that free at your local borough oftentimes, or they'll have like $10 to go get a truckload. You can definitely keep it so affordable and a lot cheaper than maintaining grass. And also, once you have that done, like in the springtime or your fall cleanup, that's it. You don't have to do a lot of maintenance all season. While with grass, you have to be out there weekly or bi-weekly, cutting your grass, edging, trimming, and then you have to deal with other bug species on the grass, which are non-native, causing more issues. I don't like having grubs in my yard or other animals and critters laying across it that are spread into my garden. So that's something for people to also keep in mind. It's a lot more maintenance having a lawn, and I don't think it's very pretty, especially midsummer when it all turns brown in the middle of a heat wave. I
Mhm.
don't like that. I'll have nice, gorgeous flowers and everything in bloom. There'll be butterflies everywhere. And I'd rather that than have a lawn.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's just beautiful. Yeah, I mean, now you have like our backyard. It's been last year was so damaged, it's never really fully returned, and there's patches like bald spots. I mean, it's like, yeah, I would rather see beautiful butterflies and everything else too. I agree. So let's on that note, let's move along to. I don't know if you want to get into the mulch and the what you had said before about the mulch and the rocks, and if that's tied to something specific that
Sure.
you wanted to talk about.
Well, it's more coming down to I want it to be fun for people. So people think like, oh, it's just got to look a certain way. What if people don't like mulch? Well, you still want to have some mulch for a softer ground. Insects need that to burrow. So do certain birds. Bees need it. Bees live in the ground. People are like, well, where do bees go? They're in the ground. They burrow in. You have to have a soft environment.
Hmm.
Now, if you want to keep a little bit of a style to it, I love stone mixed in. That's a great thing to do. I like to do, you can put an edging for it, which I recommend when you're doing a mixture. I like to do stone right immediately around the plants. Looks real pretty, like nice circles. You can do like a Japanese garden style to it. And then, or dry rock beds in the middle of your mulch beds. And I recommend that to people as a way to um, kind of get like their own style to it to make it fun, because a lot of gardens just people are like, oh, that's kind of not my thing, they don't like the looks of it. Well, make it your look. You can still do it while having a healthy native environment. That's what I like to recommend to people. A lot of people don't even like mulch at all. Once your garden starts to fill in, you'll never have to mulch. My neighbor, she doesn't even mulch her bed. She hasn't mulched her beds in probably about 15 years because her garden is so full. She doesn't need to. She has local native ferns that fill in around things. She has bee balm that spreads like crazy, monarda. That's a really great native plant, and that will just multiply and fill in. I have in my front bed, I still mulch it for now, but I'm starting to get to the point where I'm going to have less and less each year because I have local Tixie coreopsis that multiplies and spreads in on its own, and it just pops up everywhere. So, and same with milkweed too. So you'll eventually hit a point where you'll barely even have to mulch if you don't want to. And like I said, just add some stones, add a decorative stone, a boulder if you'd like. I grew up in Schuylkill County. It was common to have a large hunk of coal sitting in your garden bed to show you came from a coal mining family. You can add a cultural side to it if you'd like.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, for me, one of the fun parts, and again, I wouldn't call myself, I don't know that much, but I'm trying to learn more, and I'm trying my best. I've been planting more the past few years, but I love getting ideas from Pinterest. I'm a big fan of upcycling, so anything that you can add decoratively, I mean, I'm someone who my mother's like, oh, what'd you bring home from a trash again? Like I might see bicycle wheels, and seeing
I
them
love
in
it.
gardens with flowers going up around them. Like I just like adding different things to make it look pretty as well. And hopefully I'm not damaging anything, you can absolutely have fun with your garden and show, I think, your personality in it, whether you like to put a little gnome here and there or whatever. I think that's the fun part for me.
It is. I just did, I added another garden bed in my backyard, and I wanted to do like a funky edging. And I also looked on Pinterest. I love Pinterest. It is dangerous. Um, but I actually had like cookie slabs of wood from trees that were cut down on our property, and I wanted to keep them and incorporate them somehow into the landscape. The history of having a tree that been there 50 plus years on our property that we took down last year. So I chopped them in half, yes, so they're half circles, and I edged those into a garden bed. So my edging is half moons of wood down through. And it's from a tree that had been on a property for so long. And some of the stone we have a fieldstone wall we made that was half buried into the ground that we resurfaced, and chunks from an old mason shop that used to be there in the 50s. So we have concrete slabs, we have pure stone that they used for it, and you can see the drill marks of it from the quarry from like the 50s still on it. So it's really neat to rebuild our beds with materials from our property, showing the history of 50 plus years ago.
I think that's great. I mean, that is so cool. I mean, not only is it nice to look at, but like you said, it has the history in it, which I think has meaning and values. That's really cool. Um, is there anything else I want to talk about and give you some time to talk about what you're doing, a business that you provide, a service, I should say, that you provide for people to learn about here in Northeastern Pennsylvania. But before we move on to that, is there anything else you'd want to say about gardening in the summertime? Because this is going to air the end of June. And I mean, of course, you could talk about, there's so much you could talk about. I could have you back on the fall because there's certain things they need to know about in the fall and preparing for the winter. But anything else as far as tips, do's and don'ts that are really important that you'd like to share about summer gardening before we go on and talk about what you're doing on your business?
I like to tell people, don't be afraid to garden as long as it's warm. So a lot of people are like, oh, but is that okay to put in now? It's the middle of summer, it's in the heat. That's fine. It comes down to how much shock the plant will go through. And as long as you keep it watered, now you don't want to be out there drowning it every day because you don't want to get like a powdery mildew on it or a fungus. But as long as you keep it watered properly, it is safe to garden in the middle of summer. I'm still adding plants to this day. Last week, I just put in a bunch of Russian sage on one side of my property, and I still add coneflowers and everything everywhere. The one thing for people to keep in mind is just blooms. Now, if you're going to transplant from another person's garden, just don't do that right now for certain plants. Unless it was spring blooming, wait to do it till the fall. Wait until plants are done blooming before you transplant. That is the biggest thing to keep in mind. They'll go through so much shock, it might even kill the plant at that point. So that's something I like to tell people. Bleeding hearts, that's ideal to transplant now, peonies. Certain astilbes are almost done blooming, so that's okay now. Purple salvia is okay to do right now. So that's something to keep in mind. If it's like coneflowers, if you were taking them from someone's garden, wait to do that until the fall. Wait until end of September before you do that, because you'll probably have to cut off the flowers as well and cut them down when you go to transplant them. It really helps with the shock because they're not using energy to try to keep those blooms alive. They're using that energy to form a root system in their new environment. So that's the main thing I like to tell people. It is totally great to garden right now. I'm actually going crazy with it because we're finally getting so much rain. I don't have to water my plants at all for the next couple of days. We've been getting so much. I put in plants a couple of weeks ago that looked rough at first with the heat wave. They're already double in size and green now from all this rain. So don't be afraid to do it. It is ideal time. And even if you want to garden, but you don't know where to start, just think of a spot in your lawn if you want to get rid of to shrink. My biggest fan favorite is doing landscape mounds in your yard. If you don't have good beds around your house, you don't want plants against your house, put one in your lawn. If you have even if it's only like a 30-foot lawn, put in an 8 to 10-foot diameter landscape mound. Mound it up a little bit, add fresh soil. You can put a nice mini ornamental tree, a woody perennial shrub in the middle, and taper down from it some gorgeous perennials and ground covers around it. And that will actually add so much aesthetic to your home and give it more value and look gorgeous. And like, you'll want to walk around it. You're going to want to go out in the morning with your coffee or tea, look at your plants. I'm that person. People will see me out there in my slippers and pajamas half the time looking at my plants in the morning. And I know half my neighbors do it as well. And it actually creates a sense of community too. People come up and talk to you. I have constantly neighbors that stop and talk to me. Half my town knows me because of my landscaping. So I always tell people to do it. Go for it. Make the change now, even if it's a slow process. I'm working on a project yet from last summer I started. It takes some time, especially if it's a big project, but just start now because now's the time to start. Dig up the area, get it ready, add the fresh soil now so it acclimates and gets ready for fall planting.
That's great advice. So let's talk about. I know, like I said, when I used to talk to you at Edwards Garden Center, you'd always get me excited about planting and different projects, and you always had great advice, and you sure as heck knew exactly what you were talking about, and had a really good eye for creating container gardens and all kinds of things. So tell us a little bit about what you offer, what services you offer, so people can reach out to you if they want some help creating some beauty in their yard.
Yeah, so I don't do as much of the landscaping side, the installation myself, unless it's a very small job, just because it's me and my little truck. So I do offer the landscape design and consultation. So it's a low cost for a design from me, and then I let you know exactly the plants you need, where to place them. So it's no research on the customer's end at all. They don't have to worry about anything because I know what I'm talking about. So I know what plants you can have. I know how big they'll get. So I know what to put in. If you would try to go through, unfortunately, some garden centers, it may be free your design, but then you are contracted only by their plants. And not all the plants you may want might be from that garden center. And also, if you go through just, let's say, a normal landscaper, a lot of them, it's 50-50. Some know their plants, some don't. And they just go off of sometimes what is pretty. And this is in no way in disrespect to landscapers, but they do the hardest part, the installation. They don't know as much like what plants should go where. That's where I've always been a consultant for them. And that's basically what I do. You could cut out that middleman. If you just want to do the gardening yourself, I can give you everything you need to get there. So I would come out, I survey people's properties, and I will measure out and create a design on paper for them. So they actually have a map to follow with installation. Or if they do feel like hiring a landscaper to install it for them, it will be so easy to read. Anyone can install it then. And that way I let people know like what they can have. I don't want people having a landscape that they have to rip out in 15 years because it overgrew and it doesn't look good against their home anymore. I want people to have a lifelong garden that they will love to look at each day and want to invest in more. And that's what I offer a lot of. And so it is landscape design consultation, as well as doing container gardening, arrangements for people to have on their patios for events, for businesses, for weddings. I do live planted arrangements. And that has been real popular so far as well. I've done a few different places. I've done a wedding and I loved it. And people would even think to a certain extent to have that, but it kind of makes it easier instead of having cut flowers that die and you have to get rid of them at the end of the day. These are planters people can take home and then have for the rest of the season from their important special events.
Well, that sounds great. I mean, that sounds ideal, honestly, because you start a life together and now you have something that can grow, which is fantastic. So that, and I'm glad you said that because I was going to ask you, you obviously have to see what kind of garden the people have and see like, where they're putting things. So you have to, they'll give you input, I'm sure, about maybe something that they've seen that they want, but you can tell them, okay, I could see, because you have to consider the shade, the sun, where things get planted, and you're telling them exactly where to do that, right? So that they understand and they have the best chance of creating the most beautiful, healthy garden.
Precisely. And a lot of people just don't know. And unfortunately, your big box stores have no info on the plants. And then oftentimes even go into a garden center, they might not really know, or they're just like, oh, this is real pretty, you should plant it, but they don't know where it should go. Driving through a lot of towns, especially in Northeast PA, everyone has, let's say, blossoming cherry trees, the nice weepers that fountain downward. But every single one I've seen, especially in certain towns, are within 5 feet of the home, which is not good. It has way too close to the foundation. That can even ruin the foundation, lift a sidewalk. It needs to be out from your house minimum 8 feet at least, especially if it's a dwarf. If it is a full-size cherry, I've seen those get anywhere from 35 to 60 feet tall and minimum 35 wide, and those root systems lift out of the ground. So that's something that people don't realize when they're planting it. It may stay little for the first 5+ years, and then all of a sudden you'll just see it like explode in size. And I've had to help maintain those over the years. They are not easy to maintain. They get caught up in telephone wires across from the house and all. And a lot of people don't realize that. And they're like, they love them, but they don't see what they'll be like in 10 to 15 years later, if not longer. And I have. So that's why I like to offer these services because I'm not only just read a book and know what the plants are, I've seen them grow over the years. I've been doing this 16 years and worked out on the road on a landscaping crew. So I know personally from experience what it's like to maintain things, especially when they've been placed wrong in a landscape.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously it makes sense. It pays for people to, I mean, and I would never even think about that. Like you have those root systems. I mean, that's really important. If you, if you've got that wrong, that could cause some serious damage. So it makes sense to talk with someone like yourself who knows exactly, what they're talking about and can help the person create the right garden. So that's great. So, and I'll put this in the show notes, but where is it best to call you, email you, and I can put that information into the show notes so that people could see it. But what's the best way to reach you?
Best is going to be through email, which you can definitely post my email for that. And with time, I'm still getting my advertising out there for it. Plus, I am also thinking about another business venture to add on. So that will be probably in the fall, possibly an announcement for that as well. And then I will be, if that business venture happens, people will see me at festivals and all too, to talk to me, get business cards, to reach out to me whenever they'd like to. Best will be email. And basically, if people could let me know what their situation is, what they're looking for, and we will immediately set up a time for me to come out and look at the property. I definitely do have to come out and look at the property or even the containers I'm planting beforehand, so I can give an idea of what estimate we're looking at. My services in general, it's going to be low cost if it's design and consultation. I don't charge a lot for that. I don't think people should charge a lot for that. It is, I'm helping people, but at the same time, I got to make some money, but I don't think people should have to spend a lot on that because they're going to put so much into acquiring their materials. So I just want it mostly to be a way for people to get into gardening. My business is more of a passion to help others get into it. And that's what I'm focused on with that.
Well, and that I'm sure people appreciate that because nothing's cheap these days. And plants are not cheap, really. I mean, I go out and I browse and I'm like, I mean, you could easily spend quite a bit of money on gardening easily.
Oh, for sure. And I also like to help people sometimes even find the plants. If they're like, hey, I really want this plant, where can we find it? I'll help them do the research and be like, okay, these are a list of places you can acquire that plant from. I try to help people with that as well. So that's a good thing about going privately with your design and consultation. You're not in any way contracted to a particular business. And this way you can have the liberty and freedom to search across the entire valley if need be to find that plant. And good thing I've worked at two of the garden centers in the valley and I know most of the others. So I actually have a very good understanding where to buy plants where at certain spots. I already can tell people that, which helps.
Yeah. And yeah, that knowledge is important. Yeah, absolutely. So, well, something I'm going to take it back to my garden real quick. I will tell you, I tried last summer I planted one coneflower and a bee balm, and I don't know what happened. I did something wrong, and sadly, they did not make it. But I will say the soil around my house is very rocky. And next door used to be, I think it actually used to be a wetland when my grandfather was here. And I think he filled it with, I want to say like ash or something like that. So I'll often dig up and find, I guess you'd call it ash. And
Yeah.
so and this again, this is selfish. I'm asking for my own benefit. Any tips on that? Because I have had things grow. Like I said, coral bell is like blooming, the bleeding hearts. A friend gave me sedum. I think is that sedum she
Ooh,
gave me, and
yes.
lamb's ears. The lamb's ears are very delicate. I noticed because when I hit them with the hose, I practically killed them, I think, but they're hanging in there. But the sedum's doing great. That was transplanted in the fall. We did that. But some of the things, my butterfly bush, I was so bummed. Last year I planted it, and this year does not look like it's coming back. And my bee balm, I definitely. But again, it's that ashy, rocky kind of soil. So I don't. What do you see? Any thoughts on that?
So there's one or two things you could do. You could look for plants that go for that type of soil. I always recommend getting a soil test done. You're going to have very high levels of certain components, and some are going to be non-existent because of the ash level. A lot of times that's more acidic. So like tomatoes would probably grow in that, but having something that needs a more alkaline soil will die. So that's
Mm.
something to keep in mind. If you want to balance it more, which I always like to recommend, mend your soil with fresh garden soil. Now make sure it's not potting soil that's too light and aerated. Plants will not hold in the ground with that. It has to be labeled as topsoil or garden soil that you put into the ground. And you can mend your soil and soften it quite a bit doing it that way. And I recommend people do that even 6 months prior to planting. So if you want to plant more stuff this fall, put in your soil now. That's the time to do it. Get your soil ready for fall planting. I'm doing it with raised beds, actually. I'm making my own mixture. So I'm filling those right now. I won't be planting at least until October of this year and next spring for it. But I'm making sure my soil's ready now. And that's the best thing you could do for it. And if it used to be marshy and if this still has a bit of that component, maybe look for native marsh-like plants that would love that. So swamp milkweed is a good one to have.
Hmm.
Cardinal flower. Those are favorites of hummingbirds. So I recommend those, and you can maybe recreate even a native marsh environment to have. Pennsylvania has a lot of natural wetland, and it's actually good if we even rebuild some of that, because that alone accounts for like at least 30% of birds in Pennsylvania that specifically need that environment. And you will not see certain types of birds drafted PA unless they're in an environment like that. So it'll be really good if you actually can recreate that environment of it.
Wow, that sounds great. Yeah. And I think it just for me, I was hearing so much about the pollinators and I wanted them to work so badly. And I was like, oh, and I knew digging in, I'm like, this doesn't look good. But I tried and they're not coming back. But I am happy with the other things that are growing in the shade, and the sedum did super great. They popped up from the fall and I was like, wow, I was amazed. And that was another
Yeah.
they
Sedum lives everywhere. So
does it? Okay.
it is such a good plant to have. Is yours the tall variety or the ground cover?
I guess you'd call it tall because it's not super tall at this point, but it's probably about a foot, a little over a foot high.
Oh yeah, that's going to be a nice tall autumn joy variety that's going to look gorgeous in the fall for you.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
it does so well, especially in a rocky environment, that it's actually in a cactus family. It likes that real dry, rocky soil. So that's why that will do really good there. Um, you could add more plants that like that type of soil. That would be really hardy and good for that. Your coneflowers like a little bit more moisture. Um, I would still check your butterfly bush. I've seen butterfly bushes not push out green growth until the end of June. So actually check it this week. It might have little green buds on it. If it doesn't make it, maybe try a milkweed of some sort instead there. Butterfly bush is actually a little bit of a noxious weed now in certain states. So
Hmm.
a lot of people always recommended butterfly bush, and I did at one time until I learned more about it. It can be a pollinating plant, but it's not a host plant. So it actually kind of takes away area of land for your host plants for your pollinators.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good to know. Okay. Yeah, the sedum, again, because I'm such a novice, when my friend brought these last fall, we put them in and I'm like, it looked like they were half dead, like the way they were flopped over. And I said, are you sure these are going to come back? She goes, oh yeah, yeah. I was thrilled to see them pop up. I was like, oh my gosh, look at them. And they look very healthy and green. They seem to be enjoying their time there so far, which is good.
They'll
All right.
probably pop a little bit, so just tie them up. Once they
Oh,
get ready to start blooming, you'll see the center will try to split a little bit. Just I use some twine, use a soft cord of some sort, and you can kind of tuck it in a little bit. And with all the foliage on it, oftentimes you won't even see it once you tie it up.
okay. Yeah, that's good advice. Okay. Yeah, I look forward to, I was thrilled that they popped out. I'm thinking they're going to do great. Well, thank you so much so much valuable information and so much to think about, Shelley. I really do appreciate your time, your knowledge. I will, as I said, I will put the information in the show notes. So people, if you want to learn more, you can check out the websites, check out the book that Shelley mentioned. And if you're interested, you live in Northeastern Pennsylvania, I would imagine you probably have well, you're in Luzerne County, but you're probably willing to go to Lackawanna, maybe. I don't know. I don't want
Oh,
to speak for
absolutely.
you.
Lackawanna is definitely a safe distance. Wyoming, even top of Schuylkill County is okay as well. Lycoming is actually not too bad of a drive. I actually used to live there, so I know quite a bit of Northeast Pennsylvania. I'm happy to travel, or even if it's just some questions. If they just like, it's not even like necessarily a business thing. If they just like, hey, I don't know what to do with this plant. I don't know what's going on with it. They can send me in an email with a photo of the plant, I'll help diagnose it for them, no problem.
Oh, that's great. Well, thank you so much, Shelley. I really do appreciate your time. And I know, like I said, hopefully people will take the time to listen to this, even if they don't think they're gardeners, because you could start. Hey, trust me, I would never have pictured this 8, 7, 8, 10 years ago, but I'm enjoying what I'm doing tremendously. And I will say there's a great source of pride when you're gardening too. Not only are you doing something good for the environment, but like Shelley said, admiring it when you're out there in the morning. Like I love just like looking at it. And the color of okay, I'm going to mess this up again. Stibia? Is it stibia?
Still be.
A stilby. I screwed that. I was shocked by the color of it this season. It's gorgeous. It's like this deep pink, almost fuchsia. And I mean, I have to literally stop every day and look at how pretty it is. The color is just gorgeous. So, I mean,
It
you'll
looks
have
out of
those
this
moments.
world.
Yeah. Yeah.
It
And is
Go
it
ahead.
possible the colors change throughout as it grows more?
A little bit. Sometimes they pale in color a little bit, and sometimes they'll get richer. So I've seen like there's a peach one they call it, or an apricot, and it's like a blush color that might turn more white. They have a pure white one that sometimes turns a little bit of a pinkish when it's drying. And there's a one called Montgomery, which is this most vibrant red one that will turn more of a burgundy when it finishes up. And so they have all different colors. And it's such a good plant to have. Like it is so colorful, and people don't think that was shade plants. And that's why I love those, and I love coral bells. Sometimes the most colorful gardens are actually shade gardens, and everyone thinks they can only have ferns and hostas. They can have so many other plants in there. They just, talk to someone like me, or if you do online research, the one thing I can recommend to anyone, put what zone you are. We are 5B. Because if you go online like, oh, what plants are good for shade gardening, you might find an article that's like meant for Georgia. So make sure you put what zone you are for them.
So 5B, we are our zone. Yeah. Yeah. I remember 8, 10 years ago, just a summer job. My friend worked for one of the companies that Home Depot used. I forget what nursery it was. And I worked the summer. So I thankfully, I was like, I don't want to talk to customers because I don't know anything. So I would, put the plants out. I learned how to use a jack pallet. Is that what it's called? A pallet check.
Yep.
Pallet check. I always called it the wrong thing, and lug things and, water them and stuff. But I remember, oh my gosh, I totally forgot what I was going to say there. Oh, the zones. Yeah. Because people would talk about those decorative grasses a lot, which I know a lot of times they're tricky to grow. And like if you're in the wrong zone, and that's where I learned about zones. And I was like, yeah, because people would come in and they'd be like, my decorative or ornamental grass has died. And I would hear that a lot. And it's like, oh, well, maybe the wrong zone.
And that's exactly what it is. And that's the biggest thing for people to learn before any gardening is the zonal stuff. What we consider perennials that come back year after year can be perennials also, like let's say Georgia calls it a perennial. So like if you order something, let's say online, and it says perennial, look at the zones, because it could be perennial there because it's much more tropical. They're like zone 8 to 9 down there. So it's going to come back year after year for them. That's an annual here. So even though we might call certain plants annuals, they're actually perennials just in a warmer climate. And there are ways sometimes even to keep them outside year round if they want to. So like cold frames, doing warm boxes in the ground, they might be able to keep it insulated enough for it to come back year after year outside. One person I know doesn't even dig up their canna bulbs. And canna lilies here in Pennsylvania are definitely something you have to dig up and bring inside to replant the next year, or people just buy them each year. But their basement has a heater. So the foundation warms the soil right against that section of the house. They keep their canna bulbs in, and because that ground doesn't freeze in that section, so they don't have to replant them each year. So there's different tricks sometimes you can do for that. So something to keep in mind, especially if you have like a coal stove in your basement.
Well, I know I could talk to you forever on this because then I had other ideas popping into my head about zones based on climate change and everything else and how things will change. But we'll have to table that for, I'll have to have you back because honestly, I think there's a lot to be talked about with this. This is a really, I think, interesting topic and more than just what people might think it is. So, well, again, I want to thank you so much, Shelley. We are wrapping it up this time, I swear, people. So again, check out the show notes so that you can learn more. And if you're already a gardener and some of this is already information you knew, then keep on gardening and enjoy it. And as I say every week, I appreciate you tuning in and check out also in the show notes. I have a link to my Buy Me a Coffee. It's an account I have on this platform. It's basically for folks, a lot of artists who could use some support. So if you want to help support this podcast, a $5 donation, or who am I to tell you, make it 1,000. But seriously, even if it's not a monetary donation, you know how you also can help is by sharing. Share the podcast so that other people can hear this conversation. Post it on your social media, or just tell somebody when you're standing in line at the grocery store waiting for your coffee, or just out in your garden talking to your neighbor. Say, hey, check out this episode of Uncorked with Funny Wine Girl. You might enjoy it. So thank you, as I always say, from the bottom of my heart and the bottom of my wine glass.